tea breaks or lunch, and more than happy to answer any other questions. So, thank you. So if I can invite Renee Meyer from Sheffield. Okay, thank you.
Oh, simple buttons, I like those. Excellent. All right. So my talk is called Try Before You Buy. I'm Renee. I work for the University of Sheffield, and my current job title is Learning Architect. And one of the best things about that is that no one knows what it means, which means that no one knows what I'm supposed to be doing, which I find a great comfort. But roughly, my remit is to improve the design of the spaces in which the people in the university learn. So classrooms, libraries, and spaces like that. So a lot of my job is about liaising between departments, users, and all the other stakeholders involved in our projects. So this is a quote from one of our students. So this is probably my main ambition. For us to make areas that it's actually possible to comfortably work in. I realize this isn't terribly ambitious. At the same time, I can also guarantee you that the vast majority, if not almost all of your spaces, do actually not achieve this. And neither do ours, by the way. I'm not pretending that we are achieving things that you don't. We are really, really poor at this. And we all are trying to get a lot better at this by involving stakeholders in our projects. We have IT projects, and we consult with estates, and we consult with students and staff, and we have representation on boards. And we have estates projects with IT consultation and all the other stakeholders consulted and represented. But very little of that actually leads to meaningful contributions from those other stakeholders to those projects. And so we don't achieve really what should be the most basic baseline of ambition for the projects that we run. So that was something I was tasked to maybe not solve, but at least maybe improve. And I have a bit of a software development background myself. So part of the problem I started to look at in terms of the methodology and the approach that we take to our projects. And most of you that are from an IT background here will be familiar with the agile methodology of software development versus the waterfall development of software development. So if you're not, the waterfall method is the traditional way of finding specifications and agreeing your specifications and then building the whole thing, and then you finish and then you give it to the user and then they're happy. And then unfortunately that never quite works, because by the time that you deliver what you designed, it turned out that there's lots of misunderstandings in those conversations, that the world's moved on, and then the end product is very rarely anything that people are happy with, even if it meets what you agreed to deliver on paper. So the agile methodology looks at working slightly differently, more iteratively, and it allows for a bit more conversation with users and a bit more of a learning process where you work on a problem together. But I think the key thing about agile that interests me isn't this sort of iterative versus big bang delivery. It's really about how we think about the project and what we're delivering. I'm going to slightly disagree with the previous speaker here, who I think said we did this as an estates project, the right way to do a project. And I think any project that isn't defined in terms of the end user is not defined in the right way. In the end, anything that we do isn't about delivering IT, isn't about delivering buildings. All of that facilitates other stuff that happens in the places where we work, learning, research, or whatever it might be. But the building is never the goal, the IT is never the goal, the project should not be defined in those terms, in my view. So then the challenge is, how do we define what we do in a way that makes sense to the user? How do we respect the user and their needs enough to think about a project in their terms? So that's not an easy thing to do. But maybe to give you, well, I'd just like to maybe do a little straw poll, because you have all design spaces. Maybe not professionally, but I'm sure you've done it in your home. I'm sure you've maybe redone your kitchen, or bought a new bed, or redid the living room. So just by show of hands, how many of you have done any of those things, refurbished part of your house, bought new furniture, without actually going to the shop and trying your sofa, looking at your worktop, etc., etc., but strictly purchased from a drawing or from online or written specifications? How many people have not tried before they bought? Very, very little, right? Because I don't think people do that. People don't do that. You can't understand a specification in terms that make sense to you as a user just by looking at a piece of paper, just by looking at a drawing. That important information isn't conveyed there. And so that's the thing that we try to do differently. So the first opportunity, and this wasn't by design, this was really by accident, was when we started to redesign the surface space in our information commons. So the information commons is a joint services building between our IT services and our library services, so we don't have a converged department. And we were looking at, on the one side, getting away from transactional services and much more focusing on the support of skills of our students, but also to bring together the IT help desk and the library help desk into a single point of service for students. I ran this project, and for a long time it ran very difficultly, because I did all the things that you were supposed to be doing, which is, consult with users, send out things for comment and whatever else, and no one ever responded back. No one had any comments, and no one could agree on things. We had very, very poor engagement. And then I found this space, which was an old office, which was about to be repurposed for something else. And for a couple of months, nothing was happening in it. And so I started playing around with it and putting some old furniture in and just actually modeling the space to what I thought it might roughly look like. And we invited people in and we said, well, have a look. How does this work? What do you think? And actually that really completely transformed how people engage with the project. We put notes up everywhere. You can see all the white sheets of paper on the different tables, and the whiteboard at the back, and people just made notes on everything and asked questions and make changes, and we moved stuff around, and all of a sudden this was something that made sense to people. This was something that they could try, they could have an opinion on it, they could understand whether this was something that would work for them and why, and if not, how it might be different. So it facilitated that conversation in a really, really meaningful way. And at the same time, it also allowed us to bring other stakeholders together, because once you have a discussion about exactly where that PC goes, and then you can have a discussion about where your plug sockets might need to be, or your data points and how they connect into the floor, all those problems where normally the different departments don't really work out the little details that make a great solution, having that sort of prototype environment allowed us to have that discussion in a really tangible and meaningful way. So based on that success, when we started our most recent, quite ambitious project, the new building for the engineering faculty called the Diamond, which is an £81 million project, we decided to do this again for our learning spaces. So about 1/3 of the building, which is I think in total about 20,000 square meters of floor space, is learning space or library type space. And again, I was asked to help design that, and so we tried to give users a very prominent spot in that. And so we hired Evelyn. Evelyn is one of our students, and she was paid for 300 hours in the final design year of the project to actually help us design this. And she ran consultations with users and focus groups. She went out to other libraries and wrote reports. She attended user group meetings and design meetings, not just, the project meetings where you sign off a document and rubber stamp it. No, the ones where we actually draw the floor plans and things like that. we reserved an area in our information commons that was cleared of all furniture, and every single piece of furniture that was proposed to go into the new building was put into this space. So we could see students using it as a study space. We could see which ones filled up first and which ones filled up last. We could talk to the cleaners about which bits of fabric were really hard to clean and would probably not last a year, and which ones were really easy to clean. All very mundane stuff, but a year after your building's been delivered, that's the stuff, that's the difference between a great space and one that's actually quite mediocre and disappointing. So we spoke to a lot of students, and in particular Evelyn spoke to a lot of students. And again, I know this doesn't read terribly ambitious or even revelationary in any way, but I just would like to maybe take you through some of these things. Desk, chair and power. So it's surprising how often we don't manage to do this. Desk, chair and power, right? So let's start with the chair. A chair needs to be a comfortable place to sit. I'm sure I'm not blowing any minds here, but think about that. A chair needs to be a comfortable place to sit. So why do we buy chairs without ever sitting in them? Right? Every single chair that went into the Diamond was sat in by lots of people, and they commented on how comfortable that experience was. And we made amendments based on their comments, so that every single chair and every single study space in the Diamond is a great place to sit in. Very, very simple. So we didn't make choices on what's a funky color, what's a funky shape, what looks right with the architectural idea of this space. That's all nice, but that's not really what it's about. So we don't, for instance, have a lot of sofas. Everyone likes sofas because they're colorful and they look informal, and so it's really modern because we're being all informal and colorful rather than having desks. But really, a sofa doesn't have, sorry, I'm actually going too early, a sofa doesn't have a desk. A sofa has a coffee table. It is in no way ever a study space. It just isn't. And it doesn't mean you can't do interesting things with the spaces that you design for people. It doesn't mean you can't have informal or comfortable or different types of furniture. It just means you have to think a bit differently about how you do that and respect that holy trinity of the things that you need in your space. So this is a bit like a sofa, but it actually has a bit of a desk. If you want a comfortable reading chair in a silent study space, this is it. It has power, it has some storage, somewhere to put your book or your notes. So there's small tweaks and small changes, but it's about thinking differently about the things that you design. We all want power to the desk. We know this is important, but we very rarely deliver this in a way that it works for everyone. I'm sure most of you will recognize at least some of these pictures. All the loose wires, which inevitably people's feet get tangled up in. It doesn't look well, and really a space needs to look right as well. But I'm sure most of you have been involved with excessive call-outs and issues and faults and problems with all this stuff breaking all the time, because this isn't robust. This is only a solution on paper. It isn't a solution in practice. The same goes for floor boxes. Floor boxes are a great idea on paper, but they just don't work in a student environment. No one ever puts the lids back, chairs get caught up in the boxes, and then the fragile plastic surface breaks, and everything just breaks very, very quickly because this is not a user-centric solution. So now increasingly we get sockets integrated on the desktop, like the picture on the bottom left. But if we think about the holy trinity of the study space, that takes away the desk. The desk is one of the key functions of that study space. It isn't a shelf to hold power and a PC. It is the main function of that study space. So that is not a solution that takes away what the thing needs to do in the first place. So we worked on a lot of bespoke designs because most furniture suppliers don't really have off-the-shelf solutions that meet all the criteria, however simple those criteria may be. So this is an example of furniture that we had developed and that was built for us in Poland last summer. And as you can see, well, you can't see the surface at the top, but that is completely uninterrupted. That is an ergonomical, uninterrupted, lovely working surface. Power is easily accessible, but it doesn't take your desk away. It is not subject to problems like spillages or whatever else. It is neatly tucked out of the way, but it's easily accessible. And so this gets wired into the floor, and it does mean that we want to floor fix most of the furniture, because we don't want those wires to be, inevitably furniture moves, so we don't want the wires to be pulled. It means our furniture mostly isn't actually as movable and as flexible as is fashionable to do, but that's a whole other story why I don't really think that's a problem, so I won't bother you with that today. But this is what I think a good solution looks like. But you can't buy this, and very, very few places actually have this. Most of our study spaces don't have this yet either. Anyway, we have had great feedback from the spaces that were designed and developed in that way, that really work for users, that aren't about how do we deliver something that's technologically fancy or that's visually fancy, but something that works. And I think we're getting better at this. And what's certainly become very clear for the university is that working with people in this way is extremely valuable. Bringing people together around a physical sort of prototype or example is a great way to enable conversations across disciplines, whether it is between a technical user, a technical person and an end user, or whether it is between different technical disciplines. Having an actual example to work on and to point at and to move around is a great way to talk. So we've created this, which is the Learning Lab. And the only function of the Learning Lab is to do just this. It's to bring stuff in, technology, furniture, whatever else might be part of a solution, and to try it. Bring students in, bring staff in, bring the technical support staff in, the installation contractors, estates, whomever is involved in it, and see how it works, and talk together, and point at stuff, and move it, and improve it. And once we've figured out how it's actually meant to work, then roll it out. So this has only just started, so I'm not going to tell you how great this is and how we save millions of pounds with it or whatever else. That's not happened yet. This is roughly where we are now. So we're still very much in the middle of this, but I'm very confident that this is full of potential. But I'm going to shut up now because really, rather than talking at you, I'd be really interested to just have a conversation with you because you probably have many more answers than I could ever give you. So I'd be very happy to take some questions.
How much engagement do you have with your students? Sorry. How much engagement do you have with your student guild or student union when you prepare these sort of concepts for discussion?
None, because this isn't about representation. So I think the standard thing to always do is to get the education officer from the student union on the project board. And that is useful. I'm saying don't do that. That happens. But that's not what I mean. What I mean is to get, because that person can do representation, but that student doesn't represent 25,000 students. So we get all sorts of students in all the time, formally and informally, and I'm talking hundreds and thousands. So some of the surveys, and we use some ideation software called IdeaScale, so that allows us to put ideas and designs up. It allows users to submit designs, and then they can comment on those designs, and they can vote on those designs. That leads to thousands of responses and submissions. The focus group we run with students for the Diamond have, I think we ran 5 or 6 focus groups with 25 participants each, but because we ran this for several months, like this was a learning space with all the different bits of furniture for the period of several months. So we've literally had thousands of people using that space, We've had tablets up in that space where people could vote on how good or bad they thought a particular piece of furniture was. So this is not about representation by a single person. This is about engaging with, I wouldn't say the whole student body, but a very significant part of the student body.
Hi, Renee. My name's Ian Pearson, University of Nottingham. How do you get access to your spaces given the pressure on university spaces? We're looking at doing a similar sort of thing, and the pressure on our space is immense.
Yeah. Yes, that is difficult. So in the first few instances, this one I was just lucky. My previous job was managing the building that this space was in, so I was lucky. I knew it was free, and I had a bit of wiggle room to make sure and the authority to just decide to use it for a couple of months. That was luck. For the prototyping that we did for the Diamond, that's pretty much the same story, because while I was working on that design, I was also still managing this building, which is our information commons. So I had a bit more extra wiggle room there. For this new Learning Lab space, the reason I got this is because it's a rubbish space. That's the honest truth of it. So it's a really awkward shape. It's not very large. It's got this strange. This is where it's one of yours, isn't it, Mark? so there's some comms in the corner there. So it's a weird space, so you probably don't really want it as a teaching space. It might be a bit of an office space, but the department that was there didn't really need it as such, and so it was sort of a bit surplus, just because it was hard to use, and so that's what I got.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. With the best one in the world, what you're describing sounds quite unwieldy. You've got thousands of people commenting on a space. I can't understand how you would actually. There must be some compromise there at the end of the day. You can't cater for everyone. So how do you manage that?
Well, how do I manage the fact that inevitably some of those people might be disappointed? I don't. So the thing that's been really useful about, for instance, using something like IdeaScale, is that that conversation is quite open, so people can see that people have different opinions and can see that there's a balance of requirements and needs. And so rather than talking to a single person and then at some point having to go back to them to explain why you've disappointed them, that whole discussion actually happens in broad daylight, and people are aware of the whole sort of spectrum of needs, and I think usually quite mature about the idea that you need to make some compromises in that. So I think the openness actually helps rather than hinders. No questions. It's a really good son or a really bad son. Well, I'm nearly due anyway, I think, in terms of time. So thank you very much for listening to me. Do come and talk to me later on. I'd be really interested to hear your opinions or your ideas, or hear about how your university tries to tackle this sort of challenge. And yeah, thank you.